Hi, everybody, and welcome to the SRA webinar series. Please go to sra.org where you can see all of our past webinars. They've all been recorded, as will this one be. And you can also go there and see some highlights for our upcoming meeting in New Orleans this year, in the beginning of December. So take some time and check out sra.org if you haven't recently. Today, as we go through the webinar, please type in your questions and comments into your GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll answer them all at the end and acknowledge the comments at the end. Today's topic is from our SRA webinar series, and it's Applied Risk Management, a Company Perspective. Our presenter today is Dr. Willy Rudd. He has more than 15 years experience as a consultant within risk assessment and risk management for many different application areas, including oil and gas, transport, and public sector. He is presently Senior Risk Management Analyst in the consultancy company Proactima. He has a master's degree and PhD in risk management from the University of Stavanger, Norway, and is currently also adjunct professor at this university. Rudd is chair-elect of the SRA Applied Risk Management Specialty Group. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you. Go ahead and start the webinar.
Thank you, Brett. And thanks to all of you for attending this webinar on applied risk management. As mentioned, my name is Willy Rudd. I have two positions. One is I spend most of my time as a consultant in helping companies to manage their own risk. And then I also spend some of my time at the University of Stavanger in Norway as an adjunct professor. And I like to have this because then I can learn things from research and use that in real organizations. And also the other way around, I can sometimes get ideas from projects I have been working on and see how these ideas can be developed into research. So in this webinar, I will not introduce any new concepts or ideas or anything new with regard to research. What I will do is to discuss challenges and useful, in my opinion, ways of implementing existing concepts into organizations. So it will be a practical focus. In a previous webinar, Terje Aven has shown strategies to manage risk and that it can be divided into three categories. The first is risk assessment. The second one is robustness, resilience, precautionary thinking. And the third one is dialogue, interaction, and participation. In my talk now, I will only touch upon the first of these, the risk assessment part. That does not mean that I don't recognize the importance of number 2 and number 3. They are, of course, equally important. But my own experience is, first of all, from risk assessment. And that's why I want to talk about risk assessment, first of all, in this presentation. I have been working in different industries. First of all, maybe oil and gas industry in Norway. But I have also been working in infrastructure and public sector and healthcare. And I think it's very interesting for me to learn aspects and to take aspects of risk assessment from each industry and see how they can be used in other industries. Actually, when I enter a new industry, sometimes I meet people who say that, or who claim that risk management and the use of risk assessment in their industry is unique. But in my opinion, after working with different industries, I think that many challenges are in common. Of course, the events, the things that can go wrong, is unique for each industry. But many of the challenges, good practice and success criteria in order to manage risk in a good way, they are, in my opinion, in common. When I perform my own risk assessments, I have two rules that I have kind of promised myself I will never compromise. And I will now mention these two rules very briefly. The first one is kind of obvious, maybe. You need to understand the system you're analyzing. It sounds obvious, but in reality, it's not always. In the beginning, when I enter a new industry, I have to be humble and learn from people in that industry, and use my ears more than my mouth in the beginning. But if you are not able to understand the system you're analyzing, the risk assessment will very easily be too abstract and too little concrete. So a success criteria to get the risk assessment good is to understand the system you are analyzing. And the second rule is that you have to be able to explain the results based on the real world and not by use of abstract terms. I will explain this by use of an example. I have a kindergarten close to where I live, and they have put up barriers, as you can see here. This is not an exact picture, but it's the same kind of barriers between the parking lot for cars and the kids. And if you are going to put up an argument for having these barriers, which argument would you prefer? A, the barrier is recommended because it reduces the risk from red to yellow. Or B, the barrier is recommended because it prevents people being hit by a car. I guess all of you agree that A is better, because, and the reason that, no, I mean B is better, and the reason for that is that it has arguments based on the real world and not abstract terms. So sometimes we use abstract terms in risk assessments, but we have to be able to go back into the real world and put up our arguments when we conclude. If we don't do that, we can do a poor job without knowing. I will now talk about two concepts that I have found useful when I have been entering a new application area. So these are kind of two very simple concepts. You have heard about both of them, I guess, all of you, but they have been useful for me when I have crossed the bridge from one application area to another. And the first of these concepts is the risk management process. You can see a picture on the right-hand side here. This picture is from the 2018 version of ISO 31000. The international standard on risk management. And in this this figure provides a general recipe of how risk assessments can be planned, performed, and used in organizations. The reason that I think this is useful is that in many organizations, they have different people with different backgrounds and different educations, all talking about risk, but they don't really understand that there is a relation between what they are doing. The financial people, they have been to business school and they talk about market risk, currencies, etc. And then you have, for example, engineers like myself talking about operational risk. I work with major accident risk, for example, in oil companies. It can be difficult for people in the organization to understand that even though they use the same word or term, risk, they think that this is something different. And then by putting up this figure, I can show them that, yes, it's different, but the reason that it's different is that there are different contexts, and therefore they also use different risk analysis methods. But the steps and the kind of general recipe that they follow when they perform their assessments could be the same for different departments in an organization. I will now give a few comments on the management system. The management system is kind of the recipe of the organization. To tell the people in the organization how to do things, when to do things, In the old days, this was typically done with procedures, a lot of text. Now it's more common to use processes. And you have, at least as I have seen, it's common to talk about management processes that are for the top management, like follow-up and adjustments, correct and strategy, etc. And you have core processes, which is the value chain, the main part. And then you have support processes that are processes that support the core processes in the value chain. And a management system also tells the organization when to carry out risk assessments. So this is kind of the glue in the organization, telling people when to carry out risk assessments. Here is an example. Here you can see we have the value chain. And in this value chain, there is a need for a decision. And then we ask if this decision needs a risk assessment. Is this a risk-informed decision? And if it is a risk-informed decision, then we go through the steps of the risk assessment process. And then we make the decision, and that is the risk treatment part. So in this way, the general recipe can be applied to any risk-informed decision in the organization. I cannot show you any of the client's management system, but I can show you our own in the company that I work. We sell consultancy services, and this is our value chain. We identify opportunities, we enter into contract, we plan the projects, we deliver, etc. And when delivering, I come into another place here where there is a question. This is after a kickoff meeting, and after the kickoff meeting, there's a question: is there a need for risk assessment? And that is up to the project manager to decide. And if he decides there's a need for a risk assessment, that means that the context now is related to project management. It's not related to safety. In this part of the management system has nothing to do with major accident risk or anything. It's purely related to project management because the question is here. But another place, it could be related to major accident issues. Now, if you click here that there's a need for risk assessment, we come into a place here that is it's actually the same steps as in the risk assessment process, is just with other words. And now if I click plan risk assessment, there is a box here where the risk assessment team is going to choose method. So that means since the context now was related to project management, it makes sense to choose a project risk assessment method. So just to sum up this, it's a general recipe. The steps are relevant for all risk-informed decisions in the organization, but the context will be different. In this case, we are talking about how to get a good start with the project. And the risk analysis methods will vary depending on what are the risk-informed decisions to be made. And in this case, it makes sense to choose a project risk assessment method. The second concept that I have found useful is the bow tie model. The bow tie model gives a scenario mindset. It can be used to find out what are potential initiating events, what could be the causes, what could be the consequences, what could be preventative barriers and consequence reducing barriers. This is a very simple model, but it's useful. My experience is that it's useful. This is, of course, a simplification. A model is always a simplification. And I know that from literature, there are people claiming that it is too simple, and I agree with that. In particular, on the left-hand side here, it is very difficult to predict in advance how accidents can develop, in particular in complex organizations. But working as a consultant, I have to be pragmatic, and it covers some parts of the puzzle. It is simple and intuitive, and it's a very effective way to communicate safety aspects to non-safety people. Just by showing them about, I can put up many of the important safety issues that they have in their organization and tell them how these things are related to each other. And that is valuable for the client, even though it is a simplification and probably is too simple. So to summarize, so far we have talked about these two useful concepts, the general recipe and the scenario mindset. These two things, they provide a structure that can be used in risk management. But of course, structure is not enough. In addition to structure, we also need at least two things. We need competent people, and we need a safety culture. And we need, of course, also to improve all these three aspects. And therefore, we need leadership that can enable all three of these pillars, competence, safety culture, and structure, to be improved in the organization. In my talk, I primarily talk about structure. That is because there are other people in the SRA community who are much better than me to talk about culture and competence. So my focus is primarily on this part. But of course, all three are equally important in order to succeed. This figure shows different maturity levels for the use of risk assessment in organizations. At the lowest maturity level, risk assessments are conducted only when requested, typically by the regulator. On the second level, they are conducted prior to decisions. That means that they are actually giving risk-informed, they are actually making risk-informed decisions in the organization. At third level, they are also required in the management system, which means that they have the structure in place to tell people in the organizations when to carry out the risk assessment. And then up to the top level, where risk assessments are actively used as a management tool in the organization. So then the manager, if the organization is on the top level, the manager will say, hey, stop a minute. We are going to make an important decision now, and we have not carried out a risk assessment. We cannot make this decision without a risk assessment, so we have to do it. I think there are few organizations up here on the top level, and it takes a lot of effort to walk these steps. It's not done in a quick fix. It's a tough job for an organization to walk up these steps to the top level. Now I will give some comments on tolerability of risk, the use of risk acceptance criteria. I have not been working with risk governance, and now I'm maybe touching a little bit upon other people in the SRA community and where they are experts, and I'm not an expert. So I have to be a little humble here, but I will talk about experiences on the use of risk acceptance criteria. So I will highlight this from a practical point of view, and I would love to have comments from the audience on these things, but maybe not questions about the theory behind it, because that's not my subject. I meet many clients, and this is one category of clients. He says, we are planning a new facility. How can risk assessment help us to ensure a safe design? Then he in his head, or in his mind, I can see a question mark. He has a question to me. He is open-minded and he wants support from me as a consultant. How can I help him to ensure a safe design? And then as a consultant, I start thinking, well, I can help you generate decision alternatives. I can help you to compare them. I can emphasize differences and highlight uncertainties and suggest alternatives. And together we can ensure a safe design. But then I have another category of clients, and that's this kind. We have designed a new facility. Now we need a risk assessment to verify that the design is acceptable. The problem here is that, in my opinion, it's a problem because he just asks me, is it acceptable or is it not acceptable? So it's kind of a yes or no question. And I think this way of, I mean, all the decisions have already been made. He has designed a new facility, so there are no more options here to change anything, and that means that all these things that I think are important by generating alternatives and compare, and all these things that I did with the other client, I will not be able to do with this client. And also I think that this way of thinking, by just asking, is it acceptable or not, it kind of reduces my competence as a consultant from somebody who is helping and kind of improving things to just somebody who says yes or no. And I think it's much more interesting for me to work with people who have who are open-minded and have real problems than work with people who just want you to tick off a box. And you can see this is related somehow to risk acceptance criteria, because he asked me, is it acceptable or not? This kind of mindset, I think. In the oil and gas industry, this is an example from the oil and gas industry in Norway. And we have risk acceptance criteria. For example, there are different ones, but the one that is commonly used is that fatal accident rate should be lower than 10. And another one is that the probability of impairment of safety functions, different safety functions, should be lower than 10 up to -4. So that means there's a kind of a quantitative line here. That's the 10 up to -4 line. And if you are above this, it's not acceptable. If you are below, it's acceptable. In addition, we have the ALARP principle that tells you that you should reduce risks as low as reasonably practicable. But what I see is that this line here, this quantitative risk acceptance criteria, they get a lot of attention. So there is a lot of focus on risk calculation results relative to the risk acceptance criteria. And the question that I have then is kind of, can risk acceptance criteria, maybe unintentionally, push decisions from risk-informed to risk-based? I put this up as a question mark because I'm not sure, and I don't want to be too tough on this, but at least I see that when we have risk acceptance criteria, there is a tendency that there's a lot of focus on the risk calculations to tick off this box if the risk is acceptable or not. As I said, this is touching upon risk governance, and I'm not an expert of risk governance, so maybe this could be inspiring somebody who's working with risk governance. Maybe we could discuss this in the meeting in December. It would be interesting, in a break or something. I just had some reflections here from a more practical point of view, meeting different clients. Now I will give a few reflections on two parts of the risk management process. First reflection is on the context, and the second one is on the risk identification phase. So now starting with the context. And the context is the focus on the planning phase. The context phase is, in my experience, extremely important. It's extremely important to have enough sufficient focus on the planning phase to ensure that the risk assessment gets useful. If you spend too little efforts in the planning phase, it is very easy that the risk assessment is just performed in the same way as you have done before. And then when you come to risk treatment and are actually going to use the result from the risk assessment, you see that they don't fit. It's difficult to use them because they are not fit for purpose. And I think the solution to this is to spend a lot of time in planning phase before you really start the risk assessment. And I have put this up here, like performing the risk assessment twice. Of course, I don't mean it that you should do it twice, but you should do it first as a simulation. First, you should just pretend to do it. And then after you have pretended, you go to execution phase and carry out the risk assessment. So what I say or suggest is that in the planning phase, you simulate the risk assessment. What you do is that you say, okay, the scope is like this. How are we going to identify risks here? And you discuss and find a method of that. Okay, which risk analysis method are we going to use? And how will the results look like? I mean, you don't know what the results will be, but you can think about the format. How will it look like? And then you can also even go back to the decision maker and ask, if I give you results on this format, would that be useful for you? Can you use this for risk informed to make a good decision? And if he or she says yes, well, then you have built confidence that what you get out of the risk assessment will provide useful decision support. And then after doing this in the planning phase, you can just do it. And then you are confident that it will work. I have promised myself I shall never skip step 1 because I have done it and it feels bad when you are in this phase and you realize that you should have done something else. So even in simple projects, I promise myself never to skip step 1. And now a few comments on risk identification, the risk identification phase. I think this is crucial. This is very important phase because if you are not able to identify hazards, then you cannot control it. You cannot control the risk or manage the risk if you have not identified what can go wrong. So it's very important to have a good way of identifying what can go wrong. Traditionally, at least the way I have worked with this is by dividing the system into physical areas, activities, or sometimes we use a list of guide words. And sometimes we also combine then in physical areas, you take them one by one and ask what can go wrong in this area, what can go wrong in that area. With activities, you take the activities one by one, and with the list of guide words, you go through them. This is typically performed in a workshop with experts from different places in the organization, and it's systemized by me or by a person with knowledge of risk assessment. So what comes out of this is a list of hazards. What I suggest and what I have seen is very useful is an alternative approach where you start with identifying what is unique with the system. So first you ask what is unique for this particular system, and then you dig into unique areas to identify potential hazards. Here, this tells the same information just in another way. You can see we use traditional hazard identification approach to find a coarse picture of what can go wrong. But for unique characteristics, we really dig into it and perform a more comprehensive hazard identification. I will give you an example on this. Here you can see a vehicle. This is a car. If you use the first principle, you say, what can go wrong with the mirror? What can go wrong with the window wipers, etc., etc. With activities, you will say, What could go wrong during driving in a straight line? What could go wrong during driving in a curve, etc. And with guide words, you could ask, for example, weather could be a word, and you could say, how could weather affect this car, etc. But if you use the other approach and ask about unique characteristics, then you would say, what is unique about this car? And then you would say, it has only 3 wheels. And then you would maybe find more hazards, and they would be the really important hazards, because you already know about things about window wipers and mirrors. The thing you want to know now is what you really want to manage the hazards that are related to unique characteristics. And that's why I have seen that this is a very, in my opinion, a very useful way of doing it. You can also combine these techniques. There are several. I have earlier put up this list of techniques for creative thinking. And I am, in particular, I like this number 5, to invent or create failures on purpose. So if you want to read more on this, you can, for example, study the AFD framework introduced by Stein Kaplan. And this can be combined with the thing that you identify system characteristics in this way. First, you ask, what are the particular characteristics? Well, the car has only 3 wheels. And then you use the number 5 line method to say, if we wanted the fact that the car has only 3 wheels to cause an accident, how could we do it? How could we make an accident out of the fact that the car has only 3 wheels? And I'm sure some of you have a clear mindset of how that could be done. Because if you come into a curve, this car could tilt over. That was my first thought, but maybe there are others as well. So now I will give some concluding remarks. And that is, if you are a decision maker, it's, in my opinion, it is very important that you put up what are the decision alternatives. And if you are not able to define decision alternatives, maybe you don't need the risk assessment. If you don't need risk-informed, if you don't have a risk-informed decision to make, maybe you don't need to carry out the risk assessment at all. And you should think through, how is this risk assessment going to provide decision support? And how do you need the results to be presented to provide decision support? And you should ask the risk assessment team early in the planning phase how they are going to give you the results, what the results will look like, in which format, and you should make sure that the format that you get back is useful for you when you are going to make this decision. And then if you are a risk analyst, it's the same. You should be clear on what are the decision alternatives. And you should spend sufficient time and efforts in the planning phase. You should choose the risk analysis tool that is fit for purpose. And you should not use a hammer just because you used the hammer yesterday. And very often it's useful to, early in the project, early in the work, to think about what is unique with the system you're analyzing, because it's probably a good idea to dig into those areas in your risk analysis. And finally, if you are a researcher developing risk analysis tools, you should understand how your tool is going to be used. Because a brilliant tool is not brilliant if it's unfit for purpose. Now I will give a few comments on the Applied Risk Management Specialty Group. In the SRA community, we have many specialty groups, and one of this is the Applied Risk Management Specialty Group. This is run by John Lathrop. He is the chairman, and the Applied Risk Management Specialty Group is focused on the practical issues of risk management. So we have activities in this specialty group. There will be a webinar, October 24th, and there will also be a roundtable in New Orleans. And And if you want to join the specialty group, you should tick off a box next time you pay your fee to the SRA. You can tick off a box that you would like to join the Applied Risk Management Specialty Group, and it won't cost you anything extra. So this is my last slide. I have called it the 80% consultant, 20% professor dilemma. And that is that researchers and companies, they have different, what they like is not the same. So researchers typically like new ideas. They will ask you, what is new about this? But companies, they typically like proven concepts. So they would ask, how is this what you suggest compared to what other companies do? And if I say that this is something brilliant, it's completely new, that would not build confidence. To build confidence, they would like me to say that this is what all the other companies do. So this dilemma here means, or can maybe explain that why it sometimes takes a time from research and new ideas are developed until they're actually implemented. Because you need to take it one step at a time and introduce slowly new concepts into companies. Otherwise, they will probably turn the ideas down. Okay, now I think Brett will come back and open for comments and reflections. I look very much forward to the annual meeting in New Orleans. So if some of you have would like to discuss something, I will be more than happy to take a coffee and have a chat. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you for the wonderful webinar. We do have one question so far, so I'll remind people that they can type in questions and comments into the GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll get to them and answer them. So our first question is from John Lathrop, and he says, these slides are fantastic. How can we convert them to easy, usable guidance for SRA members? And so I'll start answering this by saying, if you are willing to let us have the slides, we'll convert them to a PDF file, and we can host those in the same place where we host the webinar video, if you'd like. But I think he's asking for more than that. Sort of how do we get this so that members can know that it's there really and use it.
Mm. Yeah, thank you, John, for listening. John is the chairman, as I said, of the Applied Risk Management Specialty Group, and we have been discussing now guidelines on risk management, and that's kind of this is a subject that we will discuss in New Orleans. So I think. Maybe John and I can discuss how, if it's possible to use this webinar somehow in the work that we will be continuing in New Orleans. I would be more than happy to contribute.
Fantastic. So, okay, so be on the lookout. If you are willing to let us use the slides on the web page as well, I can take care of that piece in the meantime.
Yeah, good. I can do that.
Okay, great. So our next question is from Amy Rosenstein, and it says, it seemed that you were more in favor of risk-informed versus risk-based risk decision-making with an acceptable risk cutoff number. Is that correct? And if so, why? And do you need me to repeat that?
No, it's okay. I can try to go back to the slide where this was discussed. It's this one. And yes, that's I am more in favor of risk-informed decision-making than risk-based decision-making. And the reason for that is two things, I think. First of all, is that when you talk about risk, you cannot capture all aspects of risk in a number. If you talk about foundational issues, like for example Terje Aven, who's our boss, he talks a lot about conceptual or foundational issues, and he has in many presentations claimed that you are not able to capture all aspects of risk into one number. And because there will be uncertainties, and you have to say something about the strength of knowledge that the evaluations are based on, etc. And the other argument I see is that risk is not the only thing that affects decisions. There are also other things like costs and many other issues. So yes, from my point of view, risk-informed decision, I am more, I like better risk-informed decision-making than risk-based decision-making.
Great. So it seems you've gotten yourself in a little bit of trouble by volunteering to help. John Lathrop just commented or asked, could you lead a workshop to, quote, train SRA members on this? So he's inviting you to, I think you'll have to discuss that. But
yeah, I think we will have to discuss it. Maybe it's too late now to do it for this annual meeting, but maybe we can discuss it about another annual meeting next year or something. But I guess John and I would have to discuss that before I can accept. But we actually had a workshop last year in the DC or Arlington conference, together with I did it together with Roger Flage. He's my colleague at University of Stavanger in Norway. So we had some attendants there, but it was not organized by the Applied Risk Management Specialty Group. It was on Sunday, I think, before the conference started. Yeah, we traditionally have workshops and courses then. Yeah, it would be great to have you do another one. So we do have another question from Rebecca Miras. It says, with your division of roles between consultant and professor, doing risk management and risk analysis like the other companies in your niche is not necessarily supporting improvement. Have you ever succeeded in convincing clients to follow new risk management paths? And if so, how? That's a tough one. Yeah, it's a tough question. I don't know if I can say that I have personally alone succeeded on that. But there has been, for example, in the oil and gas industry, there has been done a lot the last years now on definition of risk and how to incorporate the strength of knowledge into risk characterizations. But the way that has really got a boost is through the regulator. The regulator has come up with this concept, and then the companies have kind of tried to. So I think it's more dynamite in being regulator than being professor when it comes to these issues.
Okay. So we have another question. It says, is one problem with risk-based decision-making that some criteria comes helicoptering in from outside of the context? Does that make sense?
One problem with risk-based or risk-informed?
It says risk-based.
Yeah, again, I must emphasize that that I'm not an expert of risk governance. There are probably many people in our community who could answer this question better than me. But at least one of the problems with risk-based is that you will never be able to capture all aspects in your description of risk. There will always be something else. So maybe this that comes in as a helicopter from the side could be one of these things. Maybe. Yeah. I don't know if that answered the question perfectly, but risk governance is a very interesting area, and I would really much like to follow the sessions on that topic in the future, because I see that it's important. There is a lot of discussions on on the big picture on how we should perform the decision making. Yeah.
So we have a follow-up from Vibeke, who was asking before about changing people's minds. She says, so the regulators pick up on science before the industry. Interesting. So I don't know if that's what you meant, or if that you were just more successful as the regulators are more successful. So
yeah, I didn't mean that. I meant that it gets a boost if the regulator picks up something. It gets a boost in the industry, because then they have to put focus on it.
yeah. They have the authority then. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, another question. I've found a key problem with clients who want to, sorry, this one's from John Lathrop. So it says, I've found a key problem with clients who want you to simply, quote, check the risk, end quote, is that they want a decide, announce, defend. Please comment. And I can repeat that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I understand the question. And it's about this thing here, that some clients, they just want you to tick off the box. And that is, of course, a challenge. But some clients are this person on the right-hand side, because they don't need any information from risk analysts. They think they have found the best solution already, and they just want somebody to tick off this box and say that it's acceptable. But for me as a risk specialist, it's not very interesting. And this is probably not a very interesting project. It would be much more interesting for me to work with the other person here, who has a lot of questions for me that I can help him to solve. It's also related to this staircase, I guess. This one. I mean, if you only conduct risk analysis when requested, it's not an actively used management tool in the organization.
Excellent. Our next question is from Sarah Lindberg. She says, you mentioned the crossing of different risk types, strategic, operational, and financial, and the issue there is no awareness of how they are connected. Would this increase risk? And could you give us an example of this situation?
I don't know if it increases risk, but it increases confusion, I think. Of course, there are some risks that are strategic first, and then they become operational. And if you go into accidents, I'm sure if you read accident investigation reports, you will find examples of projects or where it was made a decision, strategic decision early, for example, to not maintain, or or maybe that's not strategic, but to build a new facility or to go into a new area or whatever. And then later on, when this is built, it becomes an operational risk. So at least there is an interrelationship between strategic and operational, but that strategic risks become operational risks later on. And that means that maybe it would be an advantage if strategic decisions also took into themselves the challenges that may occur in the operational phases afterwards.
Okay. We don't have any more questions right now, so I'm gonna put in another plug for the SRA.org website and the webinar series, including this one, that are up there as videos, and also the other information that's available through our SRA website. including our journal and information on our upcoming meeting. I'm going to see if anybody else types in, but if not, I want to thank you for a fantastic webinar and for entertaining all of these questions. And we'll get this one posted within the next 48 hours, and people will be able to watch it. And we always get a bunch of people that had to miss it for one reason or another and who ask for the link. So I'm sure we'll have a lot of people watching it that way too. Do you have any other comments that you would like to make as we conclude?
Well, I just looking forward to the annual meeting in December and to meeting people in in that conference. That I'm very much looking forward to seeing you all in New Orleans.
Thanks. It's going to be a big conference and a vibrant one. I think people are really excited about not just the content but the location. So it'll be a lot of fun. Thank you, everybody. This concludes the webinar. Thanks for coming out.
Thank you.